Hello and welcome to PFF Wire. I'm Doug Kyed, joined as always by Brad Spielberger. Brad, how you doing after week one?
The funny thing yesterday was, I don't know if you had this sense, but we had the red zone on. We had a couple solo games, and the first half was kind of slow, not a lot of scoring. And then I feel like 7 or 8 games were one-score games, going down to the wire. We had a couple overtime games. So, we're all the way back.
Yeah, 2 overtime games, both like knotted at 2020, starting at pretty much the exact same time. I had, red zone on the TV. I had a couple other screens with games going on. Yeah, it was I for some reason it didn't at first feel like a normal Sunday, but then by the time that all those overtime games kicked in, it definitely did. We've got a lot to talk about. Let's start it off with last night's game, the most recent thing that happened, probably the biggest consequence of yesterday's slate of games. The Dallas Cowboys Buccaneers game, Dak Prescott suffered a thumb injury, reportedly will be missing 6 to 8 weeks, will undergo surgery to fix that thumb. And as of now, it looks like Cooper Rush is going to be the Dallas Cowboys starting quarterback moving forward. But I mean, this has massive consequences across the entire NFL, but simply looking at the Cowboys, their odds to win the division have literally dropped from first in the division until last. I think they were like plus 140 entering yesterday's slate of games. Now they're at plus 500. So just a massive injury. And now you're questioning whether or not the Cowboys are even going to make the playoffs.
Yeah, that's crazy. They obviously were taking a step back this year, letting guys like Amari Cooper, Randy Gregory leave to go to other teams, but you don't have to be bad that following year. I mean, look at the Kansas City Chiefs. So it's a massive loss, obviously, out for about 6 to 8 weeks, it sounds like, pending this surgery. He also just didn't look good before then. I mean, missed a couple throws. I know he dinged up his ankle in practice. He downplayed it all week long, but whatever was bothering him, he was not good. When you don't have receivers, when CeeDee Lamb was kind of underwhelming, frankly, in his own right, you have Tyron Smith obviously out for much of the season. I think it's just such a massive missed opportunity. You have a good quarterback who's now hurt, but you're 29th in cash spending in the NFL in a really weak NFC conference and a really weak NFC East division, maybe outside the Eagles, and the whole season almost might be out the window, 1 week into the year.
Yeah, and I mean, I said it all offseason. I didn't really understand what the Cowboys were doing, letting guys like La'el Collins go, trade away Amari Cooper, let Cedric Wilson go in free agency, re-sign Michael Gallup. Seems like he's going to be back sooner than later. But yeah, I mean, Dak Prescott was the lowest graded offensive player on the Cowboys with a 37.4 PFF grade. And yeah, he didn't look like himself. CeeDee Lamb didn't look like himself. And I mean, I know that you can't overspend on backup quarterbacks. I do think that teams, even teams who have their starting quarterback set should still draft, quarterbacks in the second or third round to try to get some developmental guys in there. But it's so telling that the Cowboys had Will Grier, Cooper Rush, and Ben DiNucci during the preseason, and they were willing to just put those guys on waivers. They waived Cooper Rush and waived Will Grier, knowing that no one in the NFL was going to claim them. And even if they did, they really didn't care that much. So they entered yesterday with Cooper Rush and Will Grier on the practice squad. Cooper Rush was elevated from the practice squad, but was only one of those temporary elevations. Obviously, he'll now be signed to the 53-man roster so that they have a healthy quarterback. But, I mean, that's telling that they were willing to put those guys on waivers, willing to lose them, and now one of those guys is probably going to be starting for the next 6 to 8 weeks.
It's hugely telling. And like you said, you can't spend a ton necessarily. I'm sure we'll hear a lot about Jimmy Garoppolo. Obviously, his contract is very tradable. He would have to accept the trade, but I think it'd be crazy for him not to, go play for the Dallas Cowboys. But even look at smaller moves, like a Minnesota Vikings. They were in the same position. They did not like who they had. They traded a 7th-round pick for Nick Mullins to the Las Vegas Raiders. Look, is he a world beater? Is he going to win you 6 to 8 games in a stretch if Kirk Cousins goes down? No, but this hypothetical, I think it's more and more important each year, where if you need to win 2 or 3 games, maybe your quarterback's out for a month and you need to at least be competitive, you have to have a decent backup quarterback. And Mullins isn't making crazy money. I want to say less than $2 million. So you don't have to go nuts. You don't have to get a Jimmy Garoppolo. I think they should make a move for someone. Who that is, maybe bring Andy Dalton back. He's with the New Orleans Saints. Try to do something because, like you said, they clearly do not believe in the guys they have in the building as of right now.
Yeah, it's a tough situation. Mason Rudolph is the third quarterback with the Steelers. He was not active on game day because they've got obviously Mitchell Trubisky and Kenny Pickett there at quarterback. So maybe that would be a possibility. It's probably a minimal upgrade, even if they do that, but at least he would be a backup option if things go south with Cooper Rush. Then at least you'd have someone like that. That people have thrown around Teddy Bridgewater, but like if you're the Miami Dolphins, why do you want to trade Teddy Bridgewater? Tua didn't look fantastic in yesterday's game. I'm not saying that there's going to be a situation where Tua Tagovailoa gets benched and Teddy Bridgewater comes in there, but teams don't want to trade away their backup quarterbacks, especially if they're contenders, for this very reason. So I don't know. I mean, I think personally, I know I'm sitting here in New England right now, the Patriots take a pretty smart approach with this, where they draft these developmental quarterbacks probably earlier than they should. I mean, even this year, they spent a 4th-round pick on Bailey Zappi a year after they drafted Mac Jones, but that allowed them to trade away Jarrett Stidham. They've still got Brian Hoyer, but over the years, Jimmy Garoppolo, Jacoby Brissett, Jarrett Stidham, all these guys they bring in as developmental options, and then you see which ones work. You see which ones you trade away for Philip Dorsett, like they did with Jacoby Brissett, but at least there's a influx of there's a constant influx of quarterbacks coming into the system that you can see at least what you've got there. So I don't know. What are you thinking about the Cowboys and the NFC East in general right now? Do you think they even have a shot at a playoff spot right now?
It's tough. I mean, they also lost safety Jaron Kearse, who they brought back this year on a 2-year, about $10 million deal after he was one of our highest graded safeties last year. Always been a good player that graded super well, but finally actually played as a full-time starter last year, almost 1,000 snaps. I mean, the defense looked good, right? I mean, the Buccaneers couldn't do a ton on offense for much of the game. Micah Parsons is a freak. I mean, was living in the backfield last night, but it's tough. I mean, it's tough to envision them really scoring points. They couldn't score at all with Dak Prescott, much less without him. End of the day, though, this NFC is so bad where maybe he does come back in 6 weeks and they can sneak in as a wild card. But Philadelphia, yes, they let Detroit all the way back in the game and won by a field goal, but they look to me like a team that is now going to take a stranglehold on this NFC East division.
Yeah, Connor McGovern also went down with a high ankle sprain, so he'll be out for a little while. Lots of offensive line issues there. Maybe Jason Peters comes in and fills in one of those spots. Tyler Smith moves over to guard. I don't know. It's honestly not looking good there. I will say, though, I mean, yeah, the Commanders won, the Eagles won, and the Giants won. So Cowboys already have kind of dug themselves a hole in their own division. And I would say that my expectations heading into the season were extremely low for the Giants. And just from talking to people around the league, they were actually pretty impressed with what the Giants did and how their offense looked in that game. So they might not necessarily be bottom feeders. And same thing goes with the Washington Commanders. I mean, Carson Wentz certainly looked a lot better than I was expecting in yesterday's game.
Yeah, I mean, credit to Dr. Eric Eager, one of his favorite props all season long, or off season long, I should say, has been the Giants. I want to say over 7 wins. Just doesn't think they're as bad as maybe the people think they're going to be. They do. They have some talent left over. When I clicked over, I saw Dory Jackson making a couple plays on defense. They obviously are getting some pass rushers back in the near future. And then credit to head coach Brian Daboll. I mean, being ballsy enough to go for 2 to win the game there in your debut. That's what you do when you're the worst team in a game. You're at Tennessee against a good team. You want to have more variance and shorten the amount of possessions. Going to overtime, you're probably going to lose that game. So credit to him for doing it and pulling off the win there. But, yeah, I mean, look, if Saquon Barkley can go for about 180 all-purpose yards, they did have some injuries. It sounds like Kadarius Toney is dealing with an injury again. But nevertheless, yeah, they're maybe not as bad as we thought they could be.
Yeah, Wan'Dale Robinson went down in that game as well. Let's talk about the Steelers-Bengals game. I certainly was not expecting this out of Joe Burrow and the Bengals. They obviously came back. They made things interesting against the Pittsburgh Steelers. That was one of those games that we were talking about that went into overtime. But Joe Burrow was pretty awful in the first half of this game. He had 4 interceptions, a lost fumble. Did not grade particularly well for us. I think he only got like a 53 grade. But yeah, what was your initial takeaway from just the Bengals struggling more than I think a lot of people would have expected them to?
I think one big thing, a mantra that we have here at PFF is saying sacks are a quarterback stat, which is a little bit, oversimplifying. It's not maybe that extreme, but what is true is that quarterbacks we've shown in data can control when pressures turn into sacks. He was sacked 6 times. I want to say on 11 different dropbacks he was pressured. I mean, they were getting after him all game long, and that's with and without TJ Watt in the lineup. We'll maybe get into him in a bit here, but so even if you retool this offensive line and add 3 new starters, if Joe Burrow is still holding onto the ball really long, which he was, he's going to take a lot of hits, and he cannot hold up if he gets hit that often in every game. And I would say maybe the appendix, had that out during training camp, maybe still bothering him. They did battle back and push that game to overtime, but 4 interceptions, fumbled on a sack, about as bad of an outing as Burrow could have had, in the return from making the Super Bowl.
Yeah, and certainly a little concerning, especially after how much the Bengals spent on their offensive line this offseason. I think that we all expected a lot of those protection issues and offensive line issues to go away heading into that game. But yeah, it's certainly possible that, a lot of those pressure issues that the Bengals were facing last year as well could have been up to Joe Burrow. Obviously, they didn't have a ton of talent on the offensive line. We'll see how this goes moving forward. This might be one of those overreactions to week 1 that we wind up having. But Steelers did not come out of this game unscathed. You referenced it. TJ Watt, he said, I think on air, that he tore his pec. They're determining at this point whether he's going to just try to heal it on his own, which I think Adam Schefter reported would be a 6-week timetable, or if he requires surgery, it would be a season-ending injury. They also had an injury to Najee Harris, foot injury. We'll see what happens there with him and if he's able to come back, but not great for the Steelers to come out of this game with that many injuries to important pieces.
Not at all, because, look, the defense is why they won this football game. It went to overtime, and they had 5 turnovers. I want to say Mitchell Trubisky averaged about 5 yards per attempt. Najee Harris did score a touchdown later in the game, but didn't really do anything, and it does sound like maybe a re-aggravation of a Lisfranc injury in his foot, which bothered him in training camp. Quick little fantasy aside, if he's out, Jalen Warren is their number 2 running back, not owned in almost any league, and the Steelers believe in kind of giving one running back a lot of the touches, so maybe a guy worth targeting there. But yeah, both huge absences, because they don't win this game without 5 turnovers, and they're not going to get 5 turnovers in many games going forward.
No, definitely not. Although, obviously, being able to get 5 turnovers against Joe Burrow is certainly a good sign for their defense. One other note, T. Higgins suffered a concussion in that game. He had to leave the game. We'll see how quickly he's able to recover. This was the local game for me, Patriots and Dolphins. I think that a lot of the offensive issues that we saw this summer for the Patriots reared their ugly head here in week 1 against the Miami Dolphins. I don't think Mac Jones played particularly poorly in this game. I don't think that the offensive line, they were not great, but it certainly wasn't a complete abject disaster. Bill Belichick said this after the game, if 2 or 3 plays had gone differently for the Patriots in this game, they at least would have been more in it. I don't think it was just a kind of a strange game where I don't think the Dolphins offense played particularly well in this game. I think their defense will be stout moving forward here, but yeah, just kind of an odd game overall between the Patriots and Dolphins. But the Patriots' backs are kind of up against the wall right now because of the offensive issues that we saw throughout the summer, now into week 1. And now they're going to be facing the Steelers, who have that stout defense that was able to generate so many turnovers against the Bengals. I don't know if this heads into week 2, maybe we'll start to see some offensive changes for the Patriots.
Yeah, certainly possible. I think the winner of this game may have been the Buffalo Bills, frankly. Yes, the Miami Dolphins won, and I do think their defense is legitimate. Didn't even have cornerback Byron Jones, and still were pretty stout on the back end. Melvin Ingram, great signing, 1 year, $4 million, gets that fumble recovery touchdown. And Javon Holland is one of the best draft picks from last year. Picks up right where he left off, is I think one of our highest graded safeties in the NFL. But Tua Tagovailoa, there was a jump ball to Tyreek Hill that should have been an interception. He had another throw later in the game that should have been an interception. He wasn't terrible. He obviously also hit those guys, hit Jalen Waddle for a touchdown. But I saw a stat during that game. The touchdown of Jalen Waddle was a 33-yard touchdown. It's Tua Tagovailoa's deepest or longest touchdown pass of his career, and it traveled about 8 yards in the air. So that's just kind of the story with him. I'm not trying to get too mad at us, and apologies for throwing you into the ring there, but it was a big win. He's 4-0 against the Patriots, which cannot be, shaken off. But they just, again, they look like what I expected: a good defense and an offense that, if they're down and need to score, good luck with that.
Yeah, and I think that it could be all season where you see that Tua has good raw stats, but the grades aren't necessarily there, and the big time throws aren't necessarily there. There might be more turnover worthy plays than interceptions. We'll see if he can continue to be as fortunate and lucky as he was in week 1 against the Patriots. But one other note just on the Patriots side, Kendrick Bourne played 2 snaps in this game after having a pretty strange summer. And on those 2 snaps, he caught 1 ball for 41 yards and was the second leading receiver on the Patriots. So, at least from one person that I talked to, sounds like he might be getting a little bit more playing time moving forward here. He certainly earned it in that game. But, there was bound to be an odd man out in that wide receiver room where you've got Jacoby Myers, Devontae Parker, Nelson Aguilar, and Kendrick Bourne, 4 starting caliber wide receivers, but they're running a lot of 12 personnel with Hunter Henry and Jonnu Smith on the field. So there's really only 2.5 starting wide receivers on the team. So in this game, it was Jacoby Myers and Devontae Parker were basically the 2 starters. Nelson Aguilar played fewer snaps than those guys, and then Kendrick Bourne was basically an afterthought. So we'll see how this all shifts around. But, Kendrick Bourne looked like he should be on the field on that 1 snap, just about, and basically from what I heard, sounds like it might just be a coaching change. Josh McDaniels, I think, was a big fan of Kendrick Bourne. I think Bill Belichick's a big fan of Kendrick Bourne. Mac Jones is a big fan of Kendrick Bourne, but some of those other offensive leaders might not know him as well, might have more faith after the summer in some of those other players. So just something to monitor moving forward, because certainly was a strange scenario in that game where Kendrick Bourne was the second leading receiver and played 2 snaps. This was a game that I'm sure that you were monitoring very closely, the 49ers and the Bears. Bears, one of the biggest surprises of the week, come out with a win against 49ers.
Yeah, I try not to always be a pessimist and not give my Bears some credit. They deserve credit. They played well. The young defenders played well. Our highest graded rookie was 5th-round edge defender Dominique Robinson out of Miami, Ohio. He had 1.5 sacks, one of which he just burned Mike McGlinchey and then just threw Trey Lance to the ground. Looked good. He lined up on the inside, a little bit on the outside as well. So, credit to Ryan Poles and this new staff, but it also was a mud bowl. If you tune into this game, folks, before the game even started, there was puddles splashing on every play. And then starting in about the late 3rd quarter, right when the Niners needed to start throwing the ball to make a comeback, it was a monsoon. So it was like the perfect timing where as soon as you needed to throw, you literally couldn't throw. It was it's tough to take a lot away from this game, but again, credit where it's due. They stuck in it after a very slow start. Fields had about 19 passing yards in the middle of the 3rd quarter, and then had a bomb to Dante Pettis, who gets the touchdown against his former team in San Francisco. But yeah, it was
wide
a fun
open
game.
No one on that screen on that play.
Yeah, that was a bizarre play. Yeah, exactly. The cameraman didn't even know what was going on there. But
nope.
Yeah, hey, they were a touchdown underdog at home against San Francisco. Credit where it's due.
I do want to talk about the second-year quarterback class a little bit, because this is a good time to do it. Trey Lance and Justin Fields both clearly part of that class. Mac Jones, Davis Mills, Zach Wilson, and Trevor Lawrence as well. Zach Wilson didn't play because he's still dealing with that knee injury. But I'd say that this was a disappointing day overall for that 2021 draft class. The top-rated player in that draft class, at least in week 1, was Davis Mills of the Texans with a 68.1 grade. The lowest graded player was Justin Fields with a 44.2, Trey Lance with a 53.7, Trevor Lawrence with a 56.3, and I'll round it out with Mac Jones with a 66.2. Lance and Fields, you can kind of understand the issues because, as you said, it was a mud bowl, it was a monsoon, not great passing conditions out there. Trevor Lawrence had a bad rookie season. He had a pretty bad preseason, and now he didn't have a great week 1 also. I'm just kind of curious to see how this last year's rookie class actually shakes out by the end of the season, because it's still just not looking great right now.
I watched a lot of Trevor Lawrence yesterday, and I actually went back and watched him again. And look, he did have some plays. He had some nice throws, but he missed Travis Etienne on a wheel route where he was wide open in the end zone. Should have been a touchdown. Overthrew him by legit 3 or 4 yards. Yeah. Etienne also dropped the ball 5 times. He was as bad as it gets yesterday. But yeah, there was a lot of meat on the bone. If you watched Trevor Lawrence yesterday, he just didn't capitalize on it. And I know he looks the part, and some people are already ranking him as a top 15 quarterback purely based on draft status and this projection they've had from college, but eventually he has to show it. The offensive line is not that bad. The weapons now, Christian Kirk, I thought, played well. The weapons are not that eventually he's got to do something with it because he left a lot out there yesterday on the field.
Yeah, it's an interesting situation. I asked someone who kind of paid pretty close attention to that game around the league. about Trevor Lawrence, and he was even saying that he still has faith in him. So it's not, it's not just the media types. It's not just, but I do think that there could be an element there of, everyone was so high on him at Clemson when he was coming out of the draft. Like, you're kind of relying on your priors with him, where, I'm not going to lie. Like, I was covering the Patriots at the time for, most of that college season. Yeah. And even into that draft. So I knew the Patriots weren't going to be picking first overall. I knew that they weren't going to get Trevor Lawrence. So I wasn't paying that much attention to him. I didn't have I don't have this, bias or anything like that with Trevor Lawrence. So just for me, simply seeing what he's done so far in the NFL, I'm like, I don't know. I mean, he kind of has to prove it to me, maybe more to other people. And maybe that winds up happening this season. Advantageous offense with Doug Peterson there, as you said, lots of good weapons around him. They've improved the offensive line. So there's definitely fewer excuses for him this season. So I'm just kind of waiting to see him put it all together and be that prospect that everyone expected him to be. Let's talk a little bit about the Raiders-Chargers game. So it's another kind of bizarre one where Derek Carr struggled mightily in this game.
Yeah, led all quarterbacks for us with 5 turnover-worthy plays. 3 of those went for interceptions. Also had a bad miss in the end zone, way behind Darren Waller. Should have been a touchdown there. So, look, you can't trade for Devontae Adams, re-sign Darren Waller, spend all that money on defense, and have Carr basically lose you the game. A big divisional matchup with the Chargers, who didn't have J.C. Jackson. It did have Khalil Mack, who looked pretty good in his debut, but that's just you can't afford that with what you're doing in Las Vegas. What did you see there?
Yeah, I mean, I also saw an incredible performance from Devontae Adams. So he stepped up. Hunter Renfrow was maybe not as productive as we might have expected him to be. Darren Waller had made some good plays there, but yeah, just kind of a bizarre performance from Derek Carr. Maybe still getting used to that offense with Josh McDaniels. It's one of the most complex offenses in the NFL, and it's one that anyone who would come to New England, the wide receivers would really struggle learning it. Some running backs would struggle learning it, and they never really got in a position where they had to rely on a young quarterback having to come in and learn that offense right away. In 2008, when Tom Brady didn't play the whole season, they had already had Matt Castle in that system for a while, so he knew it like the back of his hand. And then Tom Brady didn't miss another game until 2016. They had Jimmy Garoppolo, who had been in the offense for 2 years. He knew it well. Then they actually did have to rely on Jacoby Brissett for a couple of games, one of which they lost. The other one, they didn't really make him do anything. So, yeah, I think it's a tough offense to learn. We'll see if there's a bigger learning curve for Derek Carr, if there's more growing pains for him in that offense. But that could be one of the issues, is that it's a very complex offense, and maybe they do need to simplify things a little bit. But overall, I thought the Chargers played pretty well in that game as well, and that was despite the fact that Keenan Allen left that game with a hamstring injury. They're playing on Thursday night, so maybe not great timing for Keenan Allen to go down. One thing that was pretty crazy to me is that Justin Herbert played really well, I thought. And that was with basically no production out of Mike Williams in that game as well. He did almost nothing in that game. So Justin Herbert was spreading the ball around and still put in a really good, strong performance.
I got to shout him out. DeAndre Carter was our highest graded player that was a free agent this offseason, signed, I want to say, a minimum deal or close to a minimum deal. He was with the Texans, the Bears, and I think one other team last year, kind of bounced around the NFL, had a touchdown, another really nice catch I remember seeing during the day. Yeah, so shout out to one of the big free agent signings, him and O.J. Howard, I guess, the best signings of September.
DeAndre Carter was on the Patriots practice squad what feels like 10 years ago. I think it was probably legitimately 5 years ago now at this point. But yeah, he earned a 90.4 grade yesterday. And he's a guy where it seems like wherever he is, coaching staff say really good things about him. People really seem to like him. He's this kind of undersized, quick returner type guy who can make some plays on offense. But I don't know, maybe they're finally the team that's going to get something out of DeAndre Carter. But yeah, he actually played 500 snaps last season for Washington. That was the most that he's played as an offensive player throughout his career. But yeah, certainly a impressive performance there from DeAndre Carter for the Los Angeles Chargers. He got the right quarterback to kind of bring him along, and we'll see what happens there. Another injury from that game, Anthony Everett, the Raiders cornerback, suffered a broken thumb. He'll be out 3 to 4 weeks. Kind of a revolving door right there at cornerback for the Raiders right now. Nate Hobbs is great. He's kind of their top cornerback. He can play in the slot. He can play outside. He did a little bit of both in that game. But otherwise, a lot of questions there at cornerback. And we talked about this before on the show. Just kind of a skeleton team overall where they've got some impressive starters, but not a lot of depth overall.
Yeah, no, Averett's a big loss because they just traded Trayvon Mullen, to the Arizona Cardinals, who had some injury issues of his own right. I think he's actually injured right now, but a former second-round pick, had been a decent player for them. You mentioned also, maybe to tie things all together, you mentioned Carr maybe needs another receiver, and maybe Kendrick Bourne if he's not getting enough playing time. If Josh McDaniels loves him so much, maybe he brings him over, and maybe that's why Carr was throwing all those picks, because he was looking at Waller, looking at Adams, looking at Renfro. They were blanketed, and they didn't know what to do next. But yeah, the Raiders, the depth is not there, and more injuries is bad news.
Yeah, they've currently got, I think, Matt Collins is their number 3 wide receiver. I don't think they got a lot of production out of him. Yeah, 1 catch for 16 yards. So yeah, there is certainly a team that could use a third receiver. At the same time, I would say that Derek Carr is, I think a lot of teams would take Devontae Adams, Hunter Renfro, and Darren Waller as the top 3 pass catching options in the offense. And Josh Jacobs at running back is no slouch there as well. So I'm not going to give Derek Carr too many excuses for the poor performance there. Let's talk about some other notable takeaways from the week. Commanders rookie defensive tackle Phildarian Mathis out for the season with a torn meniscus. Ravens cornerback Kyle Fuller has a torn ACL. He's out for the season. Ravens fill-in left tackle Juwan James has a torn Achilles. He's out for the season. Eagles defensive end Derek Barnett, torn ACL. He's out for the season. Just with the Ravens here, it seems like the injury bug is biting them again, and it's rough because it was about as bad as you could possibly get last season. They have to hope that these injuries slow down now at this point.
Particularly at cornerback and offensive line, it seems to be consistently those spots, right? Like year in and year out. Fuller was a bit of a depth piece, but obviously a good former first-round pick of the Chicago Bears, coming off a down year with the Denver Broncos. But yeah, Juwan James is probably the bigger one, with Ronnie Stanley still on the shelf. James, the Ravens kind of did him a favor, if folks remember, when he tore his Achilles away from the facility during COVID, and the Broncos essentially released him and were able to kind of say, you did this without our permission outside the building, and the Ravens signed him to a 2-year deal last year as a bit of a solid, let him rehab in their building and come back and play, and he gets hurt right away. So really unfortunate for him in his, return to football that he's immediately hurt. But yeah, for the Ravens, they played the Jets. They were fine yesterday, but eventually they're going to need some pass protection up front for Lamar Jackson. He was running for his life a little bit yesterday. Quentin Williams had a good game, and there was some solid pass rushes from the Jets in a general sense. He avoided it yesterday, but he's not going to avoid it for a full season.
Yeah, and it was against the Jets, who I think we expect to be one of the worst teams in the NFL this season. But, Ronnie Stanley didn't play. He's still recovering from that injury. Marcus Peters, he's still not ready to play. He's recovering from an injury last season. And now it's those depth pieces that are already going down. So they have to hope that those starters can get back on the field. I'll just say that I was pretty impressed with Lamar Jackson this game. I wasn't able to watch, every snap very closely. But overall, he was firing some passes in there that I think that some people doubted that he could have made in past seasons. And seems like he might kind of have a chip on his shoulder this season, not getting the contract that he wanted. And we might see a different Lamar Jackson this year.
No doubt about it. We did knock the Jets. I will give them some credit. DJ Reed actually had a phenomenal interception for them. He's a big free agent pickup, and it'll be one of the highlight plays of the year. And then it's Sauce Gardner, their rookie, obviously top 5 pick, graded pretty well for us as well. But the bomb touchdown of Rashad Bateman, it was like hey, I'm betting on myself and I want a monster contract, and here you go. It was like in the air, 55, 60 yards on a rope, exactly where it needed to be. Yeah, Lamar is, he's out for blood this year.
Also, 2 touchdowns from Devin Duvernay. He'll probably be a popular fantasy waiver wire pickup based on those 2 touchdowns, but I don't know. I kind of slowed the expectations a little bit for Devin Duvernay just based on his usage out there. But I'd say that in general, there was a few guys out there. OJ Howard had 2 receiving touchdowns as well. What's his name? The running back from the Titans, Dontrell Hilliard, had 2 receiving touchdowns. Clyde Edwards-Helaire had 2 receiving touchdowns. It was kind of a weird fantasy day where like some of the top picks, your Patrick Mahomes's, your Justin Jefferson's, Devontae Adams, like went off. And then it seems like almost no one else had fantasy production this week.
It was bizarre. Yeah, quarterback was weird. I think Carson Wentz was, maybe besides Patrick Mahomes, was one of the highest, scoring fantasy quarterbacks. It was a weird day. It was. The scoring came from all over. Maybe it's week 1. It's just kind of the weirdness of it. But it was not your typical guys, scoring the touchdowns for a lot of teams.
Also, not a lot of rookies, I feel like, on offense that went off. Jahan Dotson had 2 touchdowns, but those were 2 of really of his only plays on the day. So just as far as waiver wire pickups go, there could be a lot of guys who disappoint you this year. But Brad, any other thoughts before we let everyone go here?
Yeah, well, you mentioned it. So I got a couple waiver wire mentions. I don't know if we talked about Elijah Mitchell. I mean, I probably should have mentioned that. I was the one who did the San Francisco, Chicago, so that's on me. But, I think Jeff Wilson, their backup running back, is probably the top target. He was not good against the Bears, but as we mentioned, the conditions were atrocious. It sounds like he is significantly ahead of Jordan Mason and Tyrion Davis-Price. He got all the touches after Elijah Mitchell went out. He's supposed to be out for a month plus, it sounds like. And then Chris Godwin with the Buccaneers came back in the game. It was frankly remarkable he even played in week 1. Had 3 catches for 35 yards, but then pulled up with a hamstring. Sounds like he could miss a couple weeks. Julio Jones kind of looked like Julio Jones. So both of those guys, Julio Jones and Jeff Wilson, I checked Yahoo and ESPN. They're both around 30, 40, 50% ownership in either website. So guys you should probably be targeting heading into week 2.
And just a note, it would be Tyrion Davis-Price was not active in this game. I think that the 49ers should probably just stop drafting running backs because it's really not going great for them so far. And then Jordan Mason was active but didn't play on offense in this game. It was all Jeff Wilson after Elijah Mitchell went down with that injury. And I think there's a report that it's going to be about a 2-month injury for Elijah Mitchell. So plenty of time for whoever fills in at running back for the 49ers to, make an impact on your fantasy roster. So I think that will do it for today's PFF Wire. Make sure to subscribe to PFF Wire wherever you get your podcasts, or you can keep watching it on YouTube. Fully up to you. Download the PFF app, subscribe to PFF Plus. You can still get a free weekly trial for PFF Plus, which is the best deal in all of sports. Make sure to follow Brad on Twitter at PFF_Brad. Throw me a follow at Doug Kyed. We will be back with you guys again on Wednesday to talk about all the injury updates throughout the week. I think that we're planning on being back on Friday as well to update you before the week 2 slate of games. So keep it on PFF.com until then.